Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give just a couple moments here. I see people trickling in from the waiting room, so I want to make sure that most people on board before we start the webinar. If you're tuning in, it is the second Thursday of the month, and that means this is our dedicated EAP or Expanded Access Protocol webinar discussion. I'm Catherine Small, tuning in from Boston, Massachusetts at the Healey and AMG Center for ALS at Mass General, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Sabrina Paganoni and Elisa Giacomelli, whose last name I've never pronounced, so hopefully I got that right. And if we head to the next slide, it is my honor and privilege to introduce our guest speaker for today, who is Emma Schmidt. And Emma, I'll just hand it over to you to introduce yourself and take things away with the presentation portion.
Perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Hi, my name is Emma Schmidt. Like Catherine said, I'm the Clinical Research Project Manager here at Northwestern University. So I'm reporting to you live from Chicago, not from Boston. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for having me. You will notice my voice sounds a little bit crazy. I was sick earlier this week, so don't mind if I take a couple of coughing breaks. I am fine, but we're still working through a couple of issues. So next slide, please. Today we're going to go over kind of the basics of EAPs and then kind of the more specifics of EAPs at Northwestern. So first, what is an EAP? EAP stands for Expanded Access Program or Expanded Access Protocol. This is a program that allows people who do not qualify for clinical trials to try a study drug. That's an important distinction. It's only for people who do not qualify for clinical trials to try a study drug. These study drugs have often been in a couple of phases or at least one phase of human research. We do not know the effectiveness of a study drug at the time of the EAP most of the time, so it's important to note that as well. One of the most common questions that I get working in this field is, why can't I participate in an EAP? Why can't everyone participate in an EAP? Which is a very fair question. I understand the allure of EAPs, but there is strict FDA guidance on who can participate. Per the FDA, EAPs cannot be in direct competition for enrollment with clinical trials. So if you're somebody who qualifies for a clinical trial that is active or enrolling at a site, that means you automatically are disqualified from participating in an EAP. Now, a great follow-up question to that is, why would I want to be in a clinical trial instead of an EAP, right? Why would I want to do something that might have a placebo as opposed to just taking a study drug because I want to? Another fair question, but without clinical trials, we would not have EAPs. So the most important part of research is a clinical trial. We need clinical trials to determine or confirm if study drugs are potentially effective in this treatment. So without a clinical trial, we do not have the answer to if a study drug potentially could work or be effective. The point of an EAP is not to determine if a study drug is effective. We're only really following safety. We're looking at if it's safe for that participant to take the drug. We're looking at if it's safe overall. We're not really looking at, does this do what we need it to do? We're not measuring specific study outcomes most of the time. And even if we are measuring study outcomes, we're not using those to push to the FDA and show, look at how effective this drug can be. So the most important part of research is a clinical trial. Clinical trials inclusion and exclusion criteria are picked very specifically. We're trying to get a very specific population that we hope will give us good data to see if the drug can be effective. This good data will help us determine if the drug can be used later and be approved by the FDA and therefore used by everybody. Without that, we can't move forward. So a clinical trial is our first line of importance. And if you qualify for a clinical trial, that's definitely the first thing you want to participate in. The nice thing is many clinical trials today, and I'm hoping this continues, have at the end an active treatment extension or an open label at the end. So hopefully the clinical trial you participate in does allow you to take the drug open label at some point. I also linked a couple resources here. Thank you, Catherine, for putting them in the chat. I think these are two great resources to utilize to better understand EAPs, to read through things, read through your options. The Les Turner My ALS Decision tool is a tool that kind of walks you through all of research, all the different types, and then gives you resources on who to contact. The NEALS EAP website lists information about EAPs. It has some great videos and also lists active EAPs currently. Next slide, please. So now I'll kind of go over EAPs at Northwestern. So here I have a couple of pictures of my lovely team. EAPs can take a good amount of effort. So you're seeing people here who are actively working on EAPs here at Northwestern. A lot of times, people want to understand why not every site that does research has an EAP. That's because EAPs, while on the front end, on the participant side, maybe seem less burdensome, are still quite a bit of work on the back end. So we still have all of the regulatory to do. We still have all of the study startup to do. There's still a lot of effort that maybe the participants don't see to start an EAP at a site. They also, when it comes to running EAPs, we do have the same structure. So we are still doing screening visits. We are still pre-screening patients. We're having in-person visits. We're measuring safety. So the effort that we have on these EAPs, while less so, is almost as much as in a clinical trial in terms of all of the effort combined. Here I have a picture of our staff at the Les Turner ALS Gala. We're led by Dr. Driss in the middle of both these pictures. She is our PI. She's very passionate about participating in EAPs. She is the reason we've been able to participate in so many recently. We have 3 sub-Is. We have the project manager, myself, and then several coordinators and research assistants. All of us are ALS specialized. This allows us to be involved in EAPs and also increase our enrollment in EAPs, which has been really exciting. Next slide. So you'll see here, since 2020, Northwestern's been involved in 6 EAPs, which has been really exciting. When I started in 2019, we'd been in 0. So we've made a lot of improvements and strides in our numbers of EAPs. We actually have 3 currently active. So we have seen quite a bit of an increase in our ability to participate in EAPs, as well as EAPs in general, which has been really exciting. In terms of Northwestern, the way that we run our clinic, we try to really integrate our clinic and research. So we have a multidisciplinary clinic here, which means that you come and you see multiple providers at one time. We also have a research staff member available in the clinic as well at all times. This just helps so that even if you aren't in an EAP or in research, you have somebody there that you can ask questions to. If you have questions about research, we have multiple investigators who can answer questions, as well as research-specific staff. In terms of EAP visits themselves, we do try to integrate the visits within the clinic visits. Obviously, it can be burdensome to come to site, and we understand that. It depends on the protocol. Every protocol is different, but for the most part, EAP protocols try to sync up with that 3-month clinic visit, and we try to do the same to allow ease for transportation and less of a burden for the caregiver and the participant. Unfortunately, we don't have any actively enrolling EAPs at our site. It means we're not looking for new patients currently. We do hope to have more in the future. As I mentioned, Dr. Driss and myself are very passionate about participating in EAPs and remaining an active site for EAPs. I also mentioned earlier that EAPs can have quite a high burden, which can be, kind of a wall or a barrier for many sites to participate in EAPs. So Northwestern is very lucky to be able to participate in EAPs in general, but next slide. We're also part of the Acceleration Centers of Enrollment Initiative, the ACE initiative. This has been incredibly exciting. So one of the biggest hurdles of an EAP is going to be, unfortunately, the financial side of things. Money rules research just as much as any other industry, and EAPs often have very small or very limited budgets. So something that the ACE allows us to do is to have upfront funding to have our staff be trained. We'll have infrastructure. This allows us to participate in more EAPs because we're not worried about the financial burden that EAPs cost. So another question you might ask is, why isn't my doctor, at this other site doing an EAP? It is because of the burden of both cost and effort. So being a part of this ACE initiative has been pivotal in our ability to be actively enrolling in EAPs. We hope that we continue to enroll in EAPs. It's really exciting. We're one of 3 sites. It's us, Massachusetts General Hospital, and the University of Minnesota. So all of us are looking forward to continue to enroll in upcoming EAPs, as well as enrolling in high numbers for clinical trials and observational trials. So a huge shout out to all of the sponsors and the funders for our ACE initiative. It's been a very exciting time. So thank you so much for this very brief, overview of EAPs at our site, as well as EAPs in general. I believe now we're all available for questions regarding EAPs or any questions at all. So go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A chat, and then somebody will read it out and we will answer it.
Thanks, Emma, for your presentation. And yep, we'll just share the slide for a moment here. Um, and I want to share that for the upcoming webinar schedule, definitely putting in a plug for May 22nd. So not next Thursday, but the Thursday after that. For anybody on this call who might also be interested in a platform trial update, we'll be joined by representatives from Denali Therapeutics to provide an update about their Regimen G. And then you can see on the screen there, we'll be back with the EAP webinar series on June 12th. So if you are just interested in learning about EAPs, June 12th is the next time that we'll be talking about them here. And we can stop sharing. And then I wanted to ask, I think there's some questions coming in the chat, but Emma, I wanted to talk about the slide where you mentioned that Northwestern has a few active EAPs, but none that are enrolling. So could you just explain a bit like what that means for an EAP to be active versus actively enrolling?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So an EAP that's active but not enrolling means that we started it some time ago. So all of our EAPs started last year. We were open to enrollment last year, but some EAPs have an enrollment cap, meaning that you as a site can only enroll so many people. Otherwise, EAPs can have a competitive enrollment. So all of the sites that are involved in the EAP are competing for a certain number of slots. So we either met our specific site enrollment or we met the enrollment as a whole for the EAP. So we're now no longer looking for new participants, but people who were enrolled are still in the EAP and still coming to the site or coming virtually to have their EAP visit.
Thanks, Emma. And there are a couple comments in the chat kind of related to the criteria for participating in an EAP. So there's a difference between, the inclusion-exclusion criteria that you might see for most clinical trials in ALS, but EAPs do have some criteria. Somebody mentions their personal experience that they weren't qualified to participate in a particular EAP. Can you talk about, things that might be under consideration for, criteria for EAPs, and specifically someone's asking about forced vital capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So EAPs, like research, do have their own inclusion-exclusion criteria. Oftentimes, the main criteria is not qualifying for a clinical trial, but they do have their own as well. It depends on the drug, it depends on the sponsor. A lot of times those inclusion criteria are based on safety. So if the sponsor or the investigator decides it's not safe for you to participate in an EAP for multiple reasons, that would exclude you, even if you're excluded from a clinical trial as well. That can be one of the main reasons for an EAP qualification. The other thing is many EAPs are site specific and they require you to be followed by the site that has the EAP. So there could be a geographic limitation as well. So if you are not close to a site participating in an EAP, even if you can drive many hours, you have to be followed by that site from the beginning to make sure that we're following your safety as closely as we can. So the biggest exclusion criteria for an EAP is going to be either your location or safety in general.
And there are a few questions. I think there's 3 questions that came in about specifically if you've heard about SPG 302, so spinogenics. There are 3 different people in the chat asking if you've heard anything on the wind about whether there's an EAP for that.
I have heard of it. I have not heard of an pardon me. I said I would cough of an EAP currently, but something that I mentioned before is that EAPs do have the same sort of burden of study startup, just like a clinical trial. So if it just got approved by the FDA to start an EAP, that oftentimes means that it will be months, if not more, before sites actually are able to actively have that EAP available for enrollment. We have to go through the study startup process, the contracting, the budgeting, and then the regulatory process through our IRB. So I think SPG 302 is very early in its approval for anything here in the United States. So we won't probably be able to answer more questions about it until we hear from the sponsor. The other thing is sites don't pick if they're an EAP site. So we don't get to decide if we are an EAP site. It's up to the person who has the drug. So it would be up to Spinogenics to pick who they wanted to participate in EAPs. And that process can also take time as well. So the time burden at the beginning of any study or EAP can be quite frustrating, but it will be some time before we have any more information on SPG 302.
Yeah, and if we can just add to this, I recommend that the people who have questions, you can contact Spanogenics directly. They have an email on their website. And as Emma said, again, this is managed by the company. And so you can contact the company because they'll manage this and they'll select the sites and decide all the procedures. So feel free to contact them for more information.
Hmm.
Thank you, Sabrina. And yes, and we'll definitely, when and if there's news on that front, we'll definitely, we're going to keep having these recurring monthly EAP updates. So when and if there's an update on that, we'll hopefully be able to communicate that here. But Emma, there's a question in the chat. In your experience, are there EAPs that can be enrolled remotely?
That's a great question. So EAPs, like research, everything is specific to the protocol. There are some that are done remotely. I know that the Clean EAP utilized Synapticure for remote enrollments. It just depends on the EAP and also on the person, the sponsor providing that study drug. So it is up to the person writing that protocol, not the person, the entity writing that protocol. They decide what can be done remotely and what can't be done remotely. Typically for Northwestern, we do have to at least enroll in person, but we have options for other remote visits later on in the protocol. But again, it really depends. Each EAP is so unique.
Thanks. And somebody's asking, when do you think new EAPs will become available at Northwestern? Do you think anything's on the pipeline for 2025?
That's a great question. um, pardon me. I don't know currently. I'm not aware of any in the pipeline. I'm very hopeful that we'll get more information soon. Just given the current landscape of research, I think that we're just not entirely sure what some of these companies are going to do. We have a couple of trials that are in different phases. Once we get more information from those trials, I think they'll get to decide if they want to do an EAP or not. In terms of timeline this year, I truly don't know, but I will say feel free to continue to reach out to me or to your neurologist to check in and check base. I'm always happy to answer any questions and give any information as things are changing too.
Thanks. And that is kind of my own question that I want to pose to you, Emma, is at least at your center, I imagine it applies to any center that, offers EAPs to their population. But what does it look like for people who are interested in getting involved in EAPs, or if they want to start that conversation with their physician about EAPs? Do you have any recommendations about first steps and the way to go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first step is definitely reach out to your neurologist or your care team, your provider, to see what information they might have. If you are at a site that has research, typically your provider will have a bit more information on specifics. I also, like I said, Catherine linked the two resources I provided before. Those are two great websites that have a lot of basic information about EAPs. And the NEALS website, the EAP website, does list active EAPs. So if there's any EAP that maybe your neurologist isn't aware of, but that you see on that website, you can reach out to either the site that's listed, or you can reach out to your closest local access. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to Catherine. Anybody you can grab and research to ask a question is a good place to start. So we can point you in the right direction, even if we're not the first place to start.
Thanks, Emma. And I think we've gotten to all the questions in the chat, and we've gotten to the ones that I made up on the spot. So, so I don't know, Dr. Paganoni, if you have any words that you want to say before we sign off, and then we'll hand it over to you, Emma, for the wrap up.
I'll just say that we absolutely love working with Northwestern, Emma, and the PI, Dr. Driss, and everyone there. What we're trying to do, I mean, there's many sites that are fully dedicated and really want to increase access for people living with ALS. And so we have a few new initiatives. Again, this ACE initiative for centers of acceleration of enrollment. And we're trying different ways to increase the infrastructure. And it's such a pleasure to partner with Northwestern. It's really wonderful that you also connect with Les Turner Foundation, which has been a really critical partner as well. And again, we hope to continue to increase access, and I'm sure there will be more EAPs and more trials in the coming months.
Mm-hmm. I did see one more question, actually, Catherine. Somebody asked if every EAP has a requirement of less than 50% FVC, which is a great question. I think it's directly related to the Healey platform trial. The EAP requirement for SBC is dependent on what studies the site has available. So the 50% FVC is a Healey requirement. So oftentimes that is something that indicates, if you're eligible or not, but it's dependent on the EAP that's available and also whatever protocols available at the site. So if we were a site that didn't have Healey and our clinical trial only allowed 70% FVC or above, somebody below that could technically qualify for an EAP if that EAP allowed it. So the FVC requirement is dependent on each EAP and also dependent on what clinical trials the site has available. And I think that is the last question.
And I appreciate you being here, and I'm glad that we caught you when you were on the up and up after being sick this week. But if you have any closing comments, I'll leave it to you to wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. It's such an honor to work with your team. It's always a pleasure. If anybody in this webinar has any questions or thinks of anything after, please feel free to reach out to me. My information is actually on that Les Turner ALS decision tool page. I'm always available for a phone call or an email to understand research, EAPs. This is my passion. So if you want me to monologue for a long time, I'm happy to do that too. But otherwise, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk to you guys about EAPs.
Thanks so much, Emma. And for everyone on the call, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Have a good one.